So next, for our last, but one of our most important conversations of the summit, we're going to take a look at bilingual collaborations. And especially bilingual collaborations that can help all partners reach a more diverse and a broader audience. So to discuss this topic, I am really honored to welcome my colleague here at the center, Anthony Advincula, to the stage to host this conversation, as doing translation and multilingual work is a focus of ours in New Jersey at the center. So Oni, stage is yours.
Thank you, Stephanie, and a warm welcome to you all. It's truly an honor to be moderating this session, Beyond Translation, how bilingual collaborations work and how they can better engage diverse audiences. This is the last, but certainly not the least. My name is Oni Advincula, and I am with the Center for Cooperative Media, where I manage our ethnic media projects. I worked with some of our distinguished panelists today when I was the National Media Director, an editor with New American Media, and a correspondent for the Jersey Journal, focusing on immigrant communities in Hudson County. So, working for ethnic media for over 22 years now, I have seen how bilingual news outlets thrive, how collaborations between in-language and English language news outlets greatly benefit each other. As a journalist, especially now with the Center for Cooperative Media, where we closely are collaborating with ethnic media in New Jersey and in-language general market media, such as New Jersey News Spotlight and NJ.com, we have seen how crucial translation is to reach our target audiences and inform our communities. Today, we will hear firsthand from 7 experts. They are publishers, leaders of their communities, and award-winning journalists who have been involved in bilingual collaboration projects across the country. I know their work, I know how awesome and how passionate they are in what they do. So I will give a little background about each of their projects as well as their affiliation. And we invite participants to please post your questions in the Q&A box. So let's start with the first group. Both Judan Marshall, Chief Content Officer and Executive Vice President of WFAE, and Hilda Gurdian, publisher of La Noticia in North Carolina, knew that immigration issues affecting Latinos in Charlotte needed more coverage. The best way to address it together was by sharing a reporter, which allowed them to expand their coverage and make news and information accessible to all members of their communities. So let's welcome Judan and Hilda.
Thank you, Oni. So I am so proud to be here today with Hilda, who is my partner in covering the Latino community here and in community engagement. We're just going to share some slides with the group. I'm walking you through our work. So our team is set up to have a daily focus, and also we do periodic updates with a larger team. Our daily team consists of the reporter, Laura Brache, our assistant news director, Catherine Welch, and La Noticia's editor, Diego Barahona. The stakeholders in this project are Hilda and myself, and we are joined by our news director, Greg Collard, and Alvaro, who's the vice president for La Noticia and Hilda's son. One of the reasons I wanted to do this project and I reached out to Hilda is one, we got to know each other a little through another cooperative. We applied for this collaboration at the beginning of our start of the CJC project. And I reached out to Hilda because I knew that her commitment to covering the local community aligned with our own. And I also knew that there were things that I didn't know about covering the Latino community. And I thought instead of trying to do this myself, that I could increase the cultural competency of my newsroom by working closely with Hilda, and together we could amplify each other's work. Hilda, we can't hear you.
Why we partner? Thank you, Judo. North Carolina has one of the fastest growing Latino populations in the country. And more than 1 in 4 Latinos in our state live either in Wake County or in Mecklenburg County, where our newsrooms are located. At the same time, we have seen aggressive detention and deportation activities here, which has had a downstream effect on the Latino community's access to healthcare, education, employment, public safety, and more.
So a question that we've heard throughout the conference is, so who pays for this work? We were fortunate that at the time we were thinking about this, there were a couple of grant opportunities in the state, and one was Report for America. So I reached out to Hilda, and together we put together an application to apply. For those of you who are not familiar with Report for America, they fund reporters in undercovered areas in terms of topics or in underserved communities. And so they pay the 50% of the first year base salary, and then it's up to us to find the rest of the money. So we turned to local and community foundations. We found support through the Foundation for the Carolinas and through North Carolina News Lab Fund, which is a program of the Democracy Fund. What was really important for us, because unlike some places in the country where there's a lot of support for media, North Carolina is really catching up. And so we were fortunate that the Democracy Fund had come into North Carolina and started that conversation with community foundations. And so that helped us get some support there. And then we had to cover the rest of that funding. And now we're looking to raise funds for year 2. RFA and the Foundation for the Carolinas will contribute again this year.
Let me explain briefly how it works. Number 1, we have a joint assignment process to determine who leads the edit on each piece and to set deadlines. All articles are written in English and in Spanish. Radio features are created in English, and La Noticia runs the story in Spanish, and we also run a piece, an audio piece in Spanish. Community discussions hosted in English and Spanish.
So here's just a look at some of the work that we've been able to do together. What's important to note about this is that our partnership was really funded or formed around the idea of covering immigration. But through the strength of that partnership, we were able to do so much more. So we decided to join together to do the local voters guides leading up to the election. In addition, we formed another collaboration with a wider group of publications to cover the high costs of COVID-19, particularly the financial toll that was being taken on Black and Latino communities. And so we have one reporter who focuses on covering that, the Black community, and another who focuses on covering that for the Latino community. And oftentimes their work gets cross-posted in English and Spanish for the various partners. And then conversations and engagement are a big part of what we're trying to do. And so we are trying to connect with the community. COVID, of course, has tempered our ambitions a little bit there, but we've moved into virtual spaces to hold those conversations. And we're looking to do even more of that going forward.
So as you can imagine, all of this work has brought a lot of impact in our community. And let me tell you a few of those. The collaboration allows each of us to reach a more diverse audience. The community benefits from increased coverage of issues that affect them. The collaboration has elevated our reputations and credibility within the Latino community and in the community at large. We have heard from Latino leaders that they view us even more positively as a result of the focused coverage and our approach. For example, our reporter has been told that people appreciate the steps we take to report about vulnerable residents in a way that doesn't cause any harm.
And I think that's really important. One of the examples of that is, for instance, when we talk to folks who might be undocumented, we make a decision how to present them to the audience. Oftentimes we use only the first name. A lot of these people, step up and are very courageous to talk to us because they know the risk of talking to media. And so that's been noted in the community and has resulted in that positive feedback. So what's next for our collaboration? We are looking at expanding our focus. We've been really focused on immigration. As you can see, the partnership has given us opportunities to go beyond that. And so we want to consider to pursue those opportunities. We want to increase our community forums. This year, we need to understand and reassess the news needs and information needs of our community post-pandemic. We want to create more community conversations. It's important for us to be in person and face-to-face with the community. And so we're looking for opportunities to do that. And we have a new team member joining us, Maria Ramirez Uribe, who is currently working with us on the COVID-19 project, is going to assume the role of the reporter. Our current reporter is relocating, unfortunately, so we will miss her, but we're happy to have Maria join us. Thank you.
So, Hilda and Judon, you mentioned earlier about the benefits of collaboration for the communities that you serve, but can you talk about the economic benefits for both the WFAE and La Noticia having a shared reporter?
Well, it definitely allows us to have a resource that we couldn't afford alone. Right. My budgets when I started this were where they were. And so the only way to do this was to think about a creative funding structure. Sharing that, the responsibility for that with La Noticia is definitely a help. It's also helpful because Hilda and I can go out together and talk to funders and seek that support. And so because it is a collaboration, that draws more interest than just funding one publication alone.
Hilda, do you have any addition to that?
Yeah, I think the same. La Noticia would have been unable to write all of these stories if it hadn't been for the partnership, the collaboration that we have with WFAE. We couldn't possibly afford it. I mean, this is really been great for us at La Noticia. And of course, as we said, great for the community, for both the Latino community and the community at large.
Thank you. We actually have one question in the Q&A box, but I believe this is absolutely refers to all of you. So we'll save this and then we'll go to our next panelists. Our next speakers will talk to us about La Brega, a bilingual podcast series about Puerto Rico's past and present. It's a co-production between Peabody Award-winning radio producers Alana Casanova-Burgess of WNYC Studios and Marlon Bishop of Futuro Studios. La Brega is one of the few fully bilingual podcast series that serves audiences in 2 languages. So let's hear from Alana and Marlon.
There's an expression Puerto Ricans use all the time, estar en la brega. We use it to describe how we're feeling, what we're doing, and for many, it's another way of saying
the struggle,
Viene del hustle,
grinding.
La brega. It's not just a word, it's a state of mind. It shows us something about our Puerto Ricanness, our history, our present, and maybe where we're headed.
La guerra, una guerra, la guerra, la guerra.
The land of the future, the country of the future.
It's great, but that's the brega in Puerto Rico.
La Brega, Stories of the Puerto Rican Experience, a 7-part podcast available in English and Spanish, about Puerto Ricans, by Puerto Ricans, co-produced by WNYC Studios and Futuro Studios.
In La Brega, showcasing our true Puerto Rican brilliance.
Hay una frase que los boricuas usan todo el tiempo, estar en la brega. La usamos para describir lo que estamos haciendo, cómo nos sentimos, y para muchos es otra manera de decir
cotidianidad,
sobrevivencia.
In the hustle.
La brega no es solamente una expresión, es un estado mental. Su uso nos muestra algo sobre la puertorriqueñidad, nuestra historia, nuestro presente y quizás a dónde vamos.
Lo mejor de los dos mundos.
Una guerra, la guerra.
That's the brega in Puerto Rico.
La Brega, historias desde la experiencia boricua, un podcast de 7 episodios en español y en inglés, sobre boricuas, por boricuas, una coproducción de WNYC Studios y Futuro Studios.
En la brega, continuamente buscando algo.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us this afternoon. I see some notes in the chat that people really love La Brega, which is always so nice to see. As you could hear from our trailers there, we are a bilingual podcast. We produced 7 episodes in English and Spanish. So in fact, we produced 14 episodes, which I like to remind everybody. And we did this because the Puerto Rican experience is really bilingual. When Marlon and I got together to think about producing this podcast, we decided that we really wanted our foremost audience that we were going to speak to be a Puerto Rican one. And because we have such a large diaspora, it makes sense for it to be bilingual. It's a conversation that we had early on in production, although originally our plan was actually not to be entirely bilingual. But as we started thinking about the stories that we were going to tell, and even, in journalism, we talk about the explanatory comma, which we were trying to avoid, speaking to ourselves and doing journalism about our own experience, we realized it only made sense to make this in 2 languages. And we didn't just translate the narration. As you could hear in the trailers, we also used different tape. Sometimes we refer to what we did as a bespoke translations, because we also went and did new, fresh interviews with people that we had spoken to in one language in order to get fresh tape for a second version. We realized that there were some anecdotes that didn't work in one language, and we changed them out in the script for a different version. And so it really was a collaboration between not just Marlon and I, but our team of producers and reporters who both come from the diaspora and from the island. It was really important for us to try to capture as fully as we could Puerto Rican experiences, plural. There are obviously many different ways to be Boricua. Marlon himself is an honorary Boricua. We have inducted him to our group. And anyway, Marlon, if you wanted to add anything about Futuro's role in this.
Yeah, so Futuro is a podcast company and independent nonprofit newsroom that specializes in telling stories about the Latinx experience. We've always covered Puerto Rico at Latino USA, which is the flagship show of the company. And yeah, I think this was a really brand new experience for both Alana and I, even though we both work with Spanish language tape all the time, in learning how to really production-wise create 2 versions of this podcast at the same time. It hasn't been done very often in podcasting up until now, and it's been done a few times very clunkily because it's difficult. It's difficult because we don't have the easy thing you could do in the audiovisual realm, which is just to put subtitles. We have to, in order to create like an interesting listening experience, it involves really thinking about how to engage the listener at every moment. And in podcasting, if you bore somebody for a second because they can't understand what's happening or they can't follow along, then their attention goes away and they're gone. And so it was an interesting challenge to figure out how to do this, in a way that wasn't starting from scratch, but at the same time was taking very seriously the mission of how do we create the best product possible in each of the 2 languages, and not just it be this kind of add-on or like this afterthought, oh, the Spanish version, oh, the English version, it'll just be whatever it'll be. Like, we didn't have, we were like, these will have the same narrative structure, it'll be the same story, but it'll be a different story. A lot of ways, John, the way it's translated, the choice of tape that we used, and as Alana said, we went back and we interviewed people. I might have frozen for a second. I apologize. My internet is not so great. We went back and we re-interviewed people, and in order to make sure that, for example, it would be weird if you were to the Spanish version to hear a Puerto Rican from the island English, in the Spanish version. Why? That wouldn't make any sense, really.
Yeah.
So in those cases, we went and re-interviewed the person, and it was all approaches. Yeah, Alana, take it from here.
Oh no, I was just going to jump in and save you from your internet. Since in the spirit of cooperation and collaboration. We, another thing that, Marlon comes from this world more of bilingual production work, so I learned a lot from him. But I think that we also developed, as he's saying, a new style of doing this. There were interviews that I did at the same time in one language and in another. And, we were constantly in communication with each other and with everybody on the team, thinking about how to do this in the best way. And to bring the strengths of WNYC, which is the organization that I work for, public radio station in New York, with Marlon. And actually, this is a much larger collaboration than just our two organizations, because we also worked with the Center for Investigative Journalism, which is based in San Juan. And part of our mission with this project was also to bring Puerto Rican journalists and thinkers who had not worked in audio journalism before into this medium. So all our reporters had not reported or produced work themselves before. And we were really just trying to expand audio storytelling in Puerto Rico and among Puerto Ricans in order to make this also an educational project.
Thank you. Alana and Marlon, I know our participants here would love to hear from you about voiceovers, right? La Brega doesn't use voiceovers, meaning you allow your sources to be interviewed in their dominant language. There's no interpretation, whether either English or Spanish. How do you address some of the challenges when information can get lost in translation?
So hopefully my internet is a little better now. I'll try to take this one, which is that, I think there are two basic considerations around the choice not to use voiceover. This is kind of a style that we've developed over time at Latino USA, where we use a lot of Spanish tape in an English dominant show all the time. And we decided years ago to stop doing voiceovers. One is artistic. It's just corny, to be honest. Voiceovers was the traditional way that people would handle foreign language tape in, in a lot of news settings, news radio settings. And it just always sounds canned. You lose the emotion, you lose the connection to the person. And so we figured that this technique that kind of sometimes we call it glossing over, or where after, where we do translate. It's not that there's no translation, but we don't translate everything word for word. After you hear the foreign language tape, in whichever version is the foreign language, you then hear a short description of what the person said, but that doesn't cover everything. And we also use very short clips of audio of foreign language tape so that people can hear, they can try to catch on to little bits and not get lost. And the other reason is not just the artistic, is the how to best serve the audience. And, for a bilingual audience, which a lot of La Brega and Latino USA's audience is, but especially La Brega, for a lot of the audience, they do understand both languages, and they could probably listen to it in either, and they just choose which one they'd rather listen to it in. Or they can't listen fully in one of the language versions, but they can catch enough in some of the tape. And in some ways it allows there to be, a better listening experience for them, because then you don't have the same ideas repeated one after another in the podcast. And then the other factor there is that there's kind of can be Easter eggs also for the bilingual listener, like someone who understands both languages can get little extra thing. And we think that's okay, and sometimes, like you don't have to translate every single word, because there is an audience that can get it. And so that's kind of the philosophy we've taken to these things.
Yeah, and I'll just say that we know that our listenership in Spanish is equal to the listenership in English. So we're clearly reaching, both audiences equally well. We've actually heard from a number of even like couples who are bilingual, where the partners are listening in their preferred language, and then they're able to listen, like talk about the episode afterwards together, which is really nice, and I think something we weren't expecting. And also, we've heard that a lot of people are learning about Puerto Rican slang. Like there are a few Puerto Ricans in the chat right now. Our kind of Spanish is very particular. There's a lot of really interesting words. And so, as Marlon said, there are some Easter eggs in there for people who want to listen in both languages.
Wonderful. So from Charlotte and New York, let's go to the Bay Area. This project collaboration is not just between two news organizations, but three. El Tecolote, El Timpano, and the Oaklandside are three community-centered news outlets in the San Francisco Bay Area that each bring their distinct strengths to a collaboration. El Tecolote is one of the nation's longest-running bilingual newspapers that has become a jumping-off point for emerging Latinx journalists, poets, and artists. El Timpano, on the other hand, is a participatory reporting lab designed to inform, engage, and amplify the voices of Oakland's growing Latino and Mayan immigrant communities. And the Oaklandside is a nonprofit newsroom that launched a year ago to fill a gaping hole in journalism for and about Oakland. So without further ado, let's welcome Alexis Terrazas, editor of El Tecolote, Jacob Simas, managing editor of the Oaklandside. Good to see you here. And Madeleine Bair, founding director of El Timpano. Welcome.
Good to be here.
Yeah, thank you for having us, Oni.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll just kick us off by saying I really appreciated what Marlon had to say about the fact that reaching bilingual audiences with content is not easy, and there's no one way to do it. So I've really been appreciating just hearing the different approaches that everyone's taking in all of these different formats. It's just it's really fascinating and awesome to hear. But I'll hand it over to either Alexis or Madeleine to maybe kick us off.
Sure. Hi, all. Great to be here. Also very much learning and inspired by my colleagues here. I think we're going to talk about, different approaches to what has brought us together, and not necessarily one reporting project, but different ways that we've worked and are working together. To start, I can just give a brief background about El Timpano and why collaboration is really at the heart of our strategy. I founded El Timpano about 4 years ago because Latino and Mayan immigrants were the fastest growing communities here in Oakland, but you certainly wouldn't know that by looking at local media because their stories really have not been reflected in local media. And at the same time, Spanish language news outlets in the Bay Area had been dwindling. And so, I started by simply talking with Latino and Mayan immigrants to hear, what they want to see in Spanish language media. And from there, we developed our mission of informing, engaging, and amplifying their voices. And we do that in a few different ways. Our core approaches is through a community microphone and a participatory text message reporting platform that are really designed to meet people where they're at through accessible strategies and tools, and very much in partnership with local community organizations. And collaborations are a key part of that strategy because, well, community members told us that they want simply more news and information to help them make informed decisions and be engaged community members. They also said that they want other communities. They want political leaders. They want folks who aren't immigrants to hear their stories. And so we've really worked to create an engaged audience of primarily of folks who don't speak English. So that's Spanish-speaking immigrants, as well as Mayan indigenous immigrants who speak Spanish as a second language. But there are other outlets, including El Tecolote and including the Oaklandside, that have built really engaged audiences of community members who would want to hear their stories. And so we're very much experimenting and learning by collaborating with different news outlets to really share the stories of the community members that El Timpano is in direct relationship with. And so, we did that. I'm a longtime fan of El Tecolote and friends with the team there. And so with our very first pilot, when we took a community microphone around East Oakland to ask community members how they were affected by the rising cost of housing, it was kind of a no-brainer for me to go to El Tecolote as an outlet that has kind of collaboration built in its DNA, to partner with them to publish some of the stories that we gathered from our community members in that way. And since the Oaklandside launched a year ago, it's been great to have a partner right here in the city to collaborate with to do the same. So with that, I'll hand it off to my colleagues.
Yeah, thank you, Maddie. And my name is Alexis, editor-in-chief of El Tecolote. And I remember that project really well, Madeleine, because you guys took something that was audio, and we were able to print it in our newspaper, right? 10,000 circulation every 2 weeks. And that's always been bilingual. And for those of you who don't know, every 2 weeks, our paper comes out in both languages, meaning every headline, every photo caption, every story is in both languages. And I think when we first collaborated with El Timpano and Maddie, sharing the transcriptions of those interviews, it kind of really, for me, emphasizes this guiding light in this collaboration that we have between the three of us here, the three of our news organizations, and that's accessibility. Like, we want to create stories that are accessible back to our communities. A lot of times my observation has been when you have either mainstream media, like kind of organizations go into a community, they mine stories and parachute in and just leave. What we really try to do is create media that is accessible for these very same communities. We don't want to just capture their stories and leave them out of it. Like, we want them to, to amplify their voices, but that they're able to utilize that information and access it. And for us, we've been around for 50 years creating this bilingual newspaper, so it just made so much sense that if we're all doing kind of this community work, to join and to collaborate and maximize like that effort, for the sake of better journalism, but also for the sake of serving our community. For those of you who don't know, there are a lot of things happening here and that have been happening in the Bay Area, whether it's the rising cost of rent, housing, access to healthcare, and that kind of, again, folds into this pandemic, which we're starting to crawl out of, it seems, and even to, police violence, so the way I see this partnership is all of us are doing really, really interesting things, and all of us are bringing this, our powers to the table to better serve our community in an accessible way. That's my spiel. And Jacob, love to hear what you have to, I'm a big fan of the Oaklandside as well. And we're primarily a San Francisco publication, but we definitely, this is one of the other really neat opportunities, is that we're able to amplify the voices of our East Bay community as well.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. And we're excited to partner with El Tecolote for that reason. And as Oni mentioned, we're a new organization. We launched about a year ago to fill this void in the news landscape in Oakland that really had been there since the Oakland Tribune, went away some years ago. So, for us, when we launched our newsroom, we actually launched with some founding values, and a couple of those values, like, they included reflecting Oakland's communities and also amplifying community voices. And so as an English first, news organization, how can we really do that without partnering? That's a tough task, so for us, it was like just essential to establish partnerships from the early going. And El Timpano was one of our first founding partnerships. And they've been instrumental in really helping us to, I think in part reach a wider audience, but I think I think maybe even the larger value for us as a news platform has been surfacing the voices through El Timpano's network, right? Madeleine's done an amazing job of building up a network of, engaged folks who are tapped into El Timpano, who are oftentimes, not just Spanish speakers, but folks who speak indigenous dialects. It's a really growing population in Oakland and East Oakland. And so, the partnership has made our reporting better because we've been able to include those voices and perspectives in our work. And then our audience is really we're reaching, a lot of different people, but we're definitely reaching folks who are decision makers in Oakland, who are following our work. And so for us to be able to include the voices of indigenous, migrants in East Oakland on issues like vaccine access and how distance learning is impacting kids, on issues like housing, or like Alex said, public safety, and what do Latinos in East Oakland think about this huge debate that's happening right now in Oakland around police spending. This is just a great service to us as a news organization. So yeah, thrilled to be partnering with all three. And then all three of us. And I just wanted to say that the other thing that just, in addition to being values aligned as news organizations, we also have very different platforms, El Tecolote, of course, print publication, they're reaching certain folks that way. We're primarily online, kind of traditional online publishing in English, mostly reaching folks that way. And then, Madeleine with her network that she reaches, primarily via SMS, like text messaging, right? So combine that all, and we're really able to just, amplify these voices and stories much more throughout Oakland.
Now, you mentioned that you have different platforms, but your audience overlaps. At some point they do overlap. So how do you make sure you complement each other rather than compete?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would just kind of go back to, I think naturally only we do have different audiences and different ways that we reach them. And so, I don't view us as being in direct competition with each other as media outlets. But that being said, even if we were, and even for those media outlets that, you might say we are in competition with, as a news organization, one of our other values is that we do not approach other journalists, organizations, or individuals with a spirit of competition. We actually really want to collaborate because we understand that Oakland just needs good journalism. Everyone needs that. And so, hey, if the, East Bay Times is doing great stuff, we're shouting them out in our newsletter. If El Tecolote, El Timpano is doing great work, we want to partner. We want to lift that work up too. And that's just a really core part of our values as a news organization, and something that we really try to walk that walk. So I'll just say that.
Yeah, I just add to that. I mean, it's really going back to your introduction of us. It's really finding, and I think this is really crucial at the outset of any collaboration, is really having an understanding of what are the strengths that we all bring to the table. How are they unique, and how can we work together to produce something that's greater than the sum of our parts? And, for for El Timpano, we're the smallest organization at this table. We don't have much reporting capacity, but we have a very engaged audience. And so we're able to reach folks who are directly impacted by issues that other outlets are reporting on or would like to report on. So how can we bring that to your newsroom? We've collaborated with the Oaklandside on a few articles where we worked in collaboration with the Oaklandside's reporters, and El Timpano did some reporting really based on what we were hearing from our audience. And the Oaklandside's reporters did other reporting, really looking at the more public accountability angle of the story. And I think Jacob's sharing one of those articles in the chat on virtual learning when classes were going online in the fall. And El Timpano was hearing from so many community members that, weeks into the school year, their kids still weren't attending classes. So I think really, using a strengths-based approach to understand, what are the assets that we can all bring to the table. From my point of view, I see El Tecolote as like a pioneer of really bringing art and creativity into its community journalism. So, when I'm approaching them about a collaboration, I really think about it that way, is like, how can we work with El Tecolote and its strength and its network of artists to do reporting in a different way that El Timpano wouldn't be able to do on our own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have much else to add. I think Jacob and Maddie really summed it up. All I really want to say is that we recognize also that we're living in a really busy time, and all of us are at maximum capacity. And if we're already doing this really great work, it just makes sense. And I feel like this archaic kind of journalistic model of everybody competing is no longer viable. I really feel like it has to be all about the journalism now. More than ever. I mean, we see the trust in media plummeting, as we march forward. So I think it's just about producing the best possible journalism, and we can do all of that together. And that's really the spirit that's driving this project. So
right, thank you. Let's bring back our other panelists into the conversation. We have actually a few questions here in the chat box. The first one, beyond Google Translation, do you have any suggestions of how people whose first language is not English or Spanish can access news stories originally written in Spanish? Is that clear? I actually read that question twice. Do you want to start, Alana or Marlon?
I actually was about to say I have no idea what the answer is. And I made a cringy face because I can't think of anything. I don't know if any of the other panelists have an answer.
I could take a stab at it. I'm not sure if this is totally answering the question, but I also saw in the chat Sebastian's question about El Timpano's, research on our community's information needs, and I'll drop a link in the chat on a report that we produced about that. But El Timpano, before launching anything, we invested about 9 months of just really getting to know the community that we are seeking to serve and understanding, what are the ways that they get news and information. And, what it really illuminated to us is that there are so many layers of translation. And I think when we talk about translation, we're really talking about how can we make information accessible to different audiences. And, language is one way, and is for many audiences a big barrier to accessing information. But there are also levels of technology. So many of the community members that we talked with told us that they don't have a home computer. They don't use home computers. There's also education level. And for the communities that we're reaching, there are high levels of low literacy. A lot of people didn't graduate high school. And so, regardless of whatever community that you're trying to reach, you really want to think about, how can we meet this community where they're at? And what is the different entry point for different communities to a particular issue? So, right now we're working on a project reporting on the intersection of health and housing, and working to collaborate with a few different reporting outlets on this issue. And, each of our outlets may reach a different community, and we won't produce the same story for those communities. We'll produce stories that really, speak to those communities in the way that, that is most relevant to them, and through the tools and the languages and the platforms that reach them best.
I have to plug in one of our programs at the Center for Cooperative Media. So what we do when we translate the story, let's say from Spanish to English, we post both of them, both of the versions. And then when you click the story, let's say in English, it goes back to the original content where it was. So if it was, let's say, Report Hispano, then you could see the original source of that story. Or if it's in Hungarian, when you click the English version of it, there is a hyperlink there. That's one of the ways that we've been doing to answer that question. But again, like what Madeleine was saying, there are several ways of doing this. At New American Media, and Jacob, knew about this because we worked together. It's kind of similar platform, but we provided a news digest, of all news every day and every week, and then we send it out to ethnic media. So that's another way of doing it. The second question here, coming from the same person, Mark Taylor Canfield. Do we know any organizations that specialize in distributing and translating news stories from Spanish-speaking communities and nations in other languages so that content can be shared with non-Spanish-speaking populations around the world? Hilda, do you know any of those organizations?
Unfortunately, I don't, but I think Madeleine has an answer for that question.
Yeah, I just shared in the chat Global Voices, which comes to mind as a platform that shares articles from different communities across the globe into different languages. But I'd love to hear what other platforms or services there may be.
Well, this question you really need to answer, each one of you. Are all your reporters bilingual, or do you ever pair English-speaking reporters with Spanish-speaking for interviews? It would seem that having bilingual staff is really important for this to work. He or she doesn't have anyone on their staff who is fluent in both Spanish and English right now. What can be done? What can we do?
For our collaboration, it's definitely a requirement. And, Hilda and I interviewed the people together, and Hilda will actually interview them in Spanish to check the fluency. And, there's a writing test involved to make sure that they can write both in English and in Spanish.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I mean, that's what we do, Judon and I. It's very important to really be completely bilingual, so that we can, maybe he can or she can produce a piece in English and another one in Spanish, and both audiences are served at the same level, a very, very high quality level. They have to produce high quality journalism in both languages.
In our case, oh, sorry.
No, please go ahead, Marlon.
I was going to say that at Futuro, we're a company that focuses on serving mostly serving like a US Latino audience, so a more English dominant language audience. but all of our reporters are bilingual, but many people are kind of who may not be comfortable writing a story in Spanish, but are comfortable interviewing in Spanish and working with the tape. La Brega was a very interesting project in terms of this because our entire team was bilingual. In fact, our meetings were fully in Spanglish, like completely. So we had one member of the team who was, more of a heritage speaker, who is like second or third generation Puerto Rican, and would understand in Spanish, but would mostly respond in English. And it was really fun. It would work. We could just completely, change languages mid-sentence, and it was a lot of fun. And as far as, we made sure that everybody used their strongest language to do their parts. For example, we would have our Puerto Rico-based journalists and producers on the project, write in Spanish first, or make sure that they were in charge of the Spanish episodes. And then we had the more English dominant reporters sure that they were doing the translations and stuff for the English episodes. So it's kind of, using everyone to play to their strengths. Most bilingual people are stronger in one or the other in the end. And we were lucky enough to have enough of, a kind of diverse level of language fluency that kind of allowed us to do that.
Yeah, and we even, for tracking, for example, when reporters would voice their parts and record their parts of the script, we would have a buddy with them who could help them, coach them with that particular language. I mean, everybody has a dominant language, even if they're fully bilingual, and just to help them out with thinking about what is a synonym for this word if I can't quite wrap my tongue around how to pronounce it. And everybody had that, even for people who, have lived for years in Puerto Rico. So we were very supportive of one another in the challenges of being bilingual.
We have a question from an anonymous attendee, and I was thinking about this actually during our conversation now. These partnerships that you have seem like a better way to do this kind of work in multiple languages, not just bilingual, but multiple, rather than a legacy news organization trying to hire bilingual staff itself and begin publishing in another language bit by bit. What are your thoughts on that?
I completely agree, being a legacy organization. There's more than just covering the Latino community, having a reporter do that work. There is a cultural competency piece that a newsroom needs to have to do this effectively. And we've seen this repeatedly, right? When mainstream media covers communities of color, oftentimes the lack of understanding creates more harm than good. And so by working with Hilda and her newsroom, we're able to build that cultural competency as we go. We're so much smarter from working with them than trying to do this ourselves.
Yeah, I would say I'm really the only staffer at WNYC who worked on the content production of La Brega. And if I even think about even the small part of, not small, it's hugely consequential, but engineering, for example, mixing the episodes and doing that technical skill. Futuro has bilingual engineers, and I don't know how WNYC's engineering staff would have handled that part of the work. WNYC contributed in other ways, but it would have just been hugely difficult. So the partnership, even just in that way, I think was worth it.
Anything from your group, Alexis, Madeleine, and Jacob?
I'll just say quickly, I think it's a really good question. I've been in conversation with, with reporters and editors from a number of other news outlets who are interested in collaborating in some way. And sometimes I've been approached by news outlets to, share reporting to reach El Timpano's audience when, we've actually already been doing the work to inform our audiences about XYZ issue. So I think, having an understanding of what the outlets who the outlets are that are reaching communities that, you know, that your outlet isn't necessarily reaching, of what they're doing already. And again, just going back to like, you know, what are the strengths, so that, you know, you don't try to reinvent the wheel. But, you know, how can you actually work together to do something different, and build on the work that's already being done in your community.
Now we have about 5 minutes left, and before we wrap up, I would like to ask these questions to all of you. How do you see the future of translation in the newsroom? You know, how crucial is that going to be in our stories, anything that we do in the newsroom, in our audiences? Anyone who wants to take that first?
Well, I'll just say that I hope in the podcast space that we'll be seeing a lot more willingness to reach non-English speaking communities, you know, both in the U.S. and abroad. It's, you know, like I said, more than in some other mediums, it's difficult in audio to just kind of translate, because of the nature of the medium, and it means that a lot of people, you know, there's a huge audience that can't access so much of the work that's being made, and so yeah, you know, this project was extremely exciting. And I will say, every time, you know, we're talking about making a new podcast at Futuro, you know, we are constantly being asked to make bilingual podcasts, and everybody wants to do it. And so that's been very encouraging. Whereas a couple of years ago, everyone was like, I don't think it's really worth the expense. You know, like a lot of people have wanted to reach Spanish speaking audiences in radio and audio, but haven't been willing to put their money where their mouth is, you know? And I'm seeing there to be a little bit of a change in that, where, you know, companies that we're talking with about making podcasts seem really excited about the possibility, you know, and they're not, you know, we're nonprofit, so we come from a mission-based perspective, which I think pretty much everyone in this panel. We're now with a lot of for-profit companies where they're thinking, you know, markets and profit motive. But I think, you know, to some degree, there's those two worlds are aligning right now in the search for creating more bilingual and Spanish language content in podcasting.
How about for you, Judan and Hilda? How do you see the future, especially of your partnership?
I think it's very important. What we haven't figured out yet is how to do it at real scale. You know, it takes a human to sit down and translate a story, right? Because this is something I've learned in this process, that it's not as simple, you flip a switch and translate a story from English to Spanish, right? So, you know, when we have projects that are outside this partnership that we want to share with La Noticia, we work with a freelancer to translate that work for Hilda. And so we haven't figured out how to scale that so that everything that we produce could be available in Spanish, but I'm looking forward to those answers as well. Hilda, what are your thoughts?
I think it's the future of the Spanish publications is brilliant. I mean, we are going to continue in that direction, especially here in Charlotte and in North Carolina, when the Latino population is the fastest growing segment of our community and is the youngest. So we're going to have that audience there to be served for many, many years. So our plan with WFAE and La Noticia is to continue doing that and to continue producing covering these stories in both languages, because it says a lot for, I mean, it serves the Latino community, but it also serves the English speaking audience. They really want to know what is going on in the Latino community. And sometimes they want to read it in Spanish. And also one more thing that I'd like to add, that by having this partnership and doing our stories in English and Spanish, the community at large really appreciates that we are doing something so valuable for the Latino community here in Charlotte in the state.
And just one quick thing I'll add, Oni, if this is any indication, Hilda is actually replicating this project now with another public media station elsewhere in North Carolina. So the interest is growing from non-Spanish speaking newsrooms to do this kind of work. So we're excited to see where that will take the audience.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. On that very positive note, we would like to thank all our speakers for this panel and the participants. And I would like to hand this over back to Stephanie. Thank you.